Oh my goodness. I get so excited when people submit an attempt because it is such a good teaching moment and it makes me so excited to show you that the reason you are losing marks is not because you don't know what to do. It's not because you don't know the technical knowledge, but it's often because of things that you are disregarding. Okay, and it's simple, easy fixes. Okay, so I just did a workshop with the IAC candidates yesterday. We worked through strategy, and I'll show you what the question related to. Okay, so we've got this required over here that says provide a recommendation. Now, immediately you know that you are going to have a conclusion because it's asking for a recommendation on the best investment option for Sunfood, taking into consideration your calculation in parts A and B, as well as any relevant strategic factors. So here they are basically inviting you to look at the calculations that you've done in the previous two requireds and then bring up any other things that they haven't considered when it comes to these two investment options. So that's what the required said, right? So we know we're going to need a conclusion. We know we're going to have to consider the calculation. We know we're going to have to consider other relevant strategic factors. And those other relevant strategic factors can either be things that are hard triggered in the scenario or they are contextual in that you are reading the scenario and you're going, okay, but what about this? Have they considered this? I don't see any mention of this. Those are additional strategic considerations. Anything that you have a question about can be a strategic consideration. So let's look at what this candidate did. So the first thing where they might lose a mark is they give a conclusion over here. So they say here they should choose option 1 because it has the highest IRR. This is only 1 point, and this 1 point, because the previous required, the calculations were an IRR calculation, this is only one consideration. You cannot just make your conclusion based on one strategic consideration. So this you need to save for the end. And then you'll see we get to the end and then they say, based on the above, choose option 1. Be very, very careful when it comes to a discussion question like this where you are doing a conclusion because this is not sufficient for a conclusion. You kind of need to give a executive summary of what you've discussed and say, based on the higher IRR, the lower additional costs, the reduced need for additional expertise, whatever, they should choose this option. So you kind of have to summarize the main points from your discussion above because conclusion marks, especially in the IAC format, they carry a lot more weight. They carry sometimes 2, 3, 4 extra marks. And you will often not just get a mark for this point over here. Based on above, choose option 1. Because above, you are essentially listing positive and negative points associated with each option. So it's kind of like pulling the reader in this direction, then you list a negative. Okay, so it's pulling them in this direction. Then you list a positive back to this direction, but then this one has more of a positive, so back to this direction. So you kind of need to summarize the positive and negative that you've spoken about to justify the option that you're choosing. Okay, now that's the first thing, right? Is their conclusion is very generic. It's not going to get a mark, and also including the conclusion at the top instead of at the bottom after all of your considerations, that's also going to make you lose out on marks. Let's look at what they've said here. They should consider if they have expertise to function the app. Okay, so the first option was all about developing this app that they were going to use. The second option was about acquiring a significant influence in another company. Okay, so this point that they've written, it's a relevant point, but it's kind of incomplete. Okay, because when we are dealing with considerations, anything to do with strategy, we have a very specific format that we follow, which is trigger and effect. And often what you guys do that ends up losing you marks is you have one or the other, but not both. So this one, they should consider if they have expertise to function the app. Great. it's kind of like you're giving me a point to consider, but you're not linking it to a trigger, and you're not really telling me what the consideration is. Is this going to have an implication of additional cost, additional training, loss of customers? What is the actual strategic impact? Okay, what is the actual risk or the actual benefit? So these strategic consideration type questions, that's essentially what they're looking at. Is there additional risk by taking on this decision? Is there additional benefit? So you need to either link it to the operations or to the finances of the company. So that effect has to be very clearly linked to finances or operations. So in this case, because we also had to make reference to the calculations in the previous requireds, we would have to say, and let me just type this, we would have to say something like, this cost would need to be factored into the IRR calculation, or something like there would be additional costs for training. Or maybe there isn't anybody who's versed in software development that could train them, so they'd have to hire additional personnel, something like that, but linking it to the finances or the operations. Okay, let's look at the next one. They should provide training to the employees on how to operate the app. So again, you're giving me sort of like a trigger, but the effect is lacking. Okay, we want to again link it to the fact that there must be something to do with operations or finances. So why do they need to know how to operate the app? To minimize, data loss or breaches, or to minimize errors that cause delay. Okay, something like that. So you need to make this link very, very clear. Trigger, effect, that effect is linking to the finances or the operations of the company. Okay, the app seems like a huge investment, as it will allow customers to combine items from different franchise brand menus into a single order. Okay, great. So you're giving me a trigger, but again, that effect is lacking. So these are all relevant points. It's not like the student doesn't know what to put down on the paper. They're putting down relevant considerations, but their wording is incomplete. Okay, so they've misinterpreted the required by giving the conclusion at the beginning and making it a one-liner, which is not going to get them the mark. And then they are giving triggers without effects, or giving a trigger with a very weak effect that's not directly tying to the finances or the operations of the company. Okay, if we look at option 2, many executives felt that the plant-based meal would pass, the trend would pass and demand would disappear within a few years. This could negatively affect the sales of Sun Food. Great, so now we're getting to a better point where they've got the trigger from the scenario, and they are linking it, they are actually making this like a risk that they need to consider by linking it to the operations. It's going to lead to declining sales. Great, we can give them a mark. The purchase agreement, should Sun Food want to sell its shareholding, will include a clause that they must retain its stake in Eatwell until at least 31 December 2025. This could affect Sun Food should they see that this acquisition isn't working. So this saying that it would affect them or could affect them. Okay, affect them how? So they're going to affect them positively, negatively, because remember, any other relevant strategic factors or considerations that can include both positive and negative aspects. Okay, so this is also very broad. Okay, so this person also, if we look at the mark allocation, was 19 marks, and they only put down, I think, 5 points. So this could be a result of two things. Either poor time management, where you've spent far too long trying to do the two calculations. Now you don't have enough time to do required C, so you have to be incredibly strict about allocating time for yourself. And the other issue could be that they are not picking up triggers in the scenario, or they are lacking that critical thinking. So from an exam technique perspective, you've got the required. You can go and look at what required C wants from you, and you can leave yourself a little note to say, okay, as I'm working through this information of these two options, I'm keeping in mind I need to think from a strategic perspective. But I need to keep in mind this background information, because how do I know what's a good strategic fit for a company if I know nothing about what they do, nothing about their business model, nothing about their revenue generation, nothing about what their strengths are? Okay, so keeping in mind the background information, but thinking strategically as you are reading through this. And with this question, you also had to think double whammy, because you had to think IRR and you had to think strategic implications. So for the numbers, you're going to circle them. Nice and easy. Best way to keep track of numbers. And then you also had to think about accounting implications, so how it should be recognized, and journal entries. Again, journal entries, numbers, circle the numbers. Okay, best way to keep track of numbers. Strategic implications, you can see I've got little pluses everywhere, pluses, minuses, sometimes I've got an asterisk. Okay, those are all things I'm thinking about from a strategic perspective, because I'm going to implement the plug and play, which means I'm going to look for these little symbols, and that's what I'm going to put into my answer. So they do not have a brand that's exclusively plant-based. Oh, hello, that's fantastic. So now they're going to expand their product offering, but maybe they don't have customers that are into being plant-based. So they might lose customers to competitors. Boom, there we go. Cool. So you can see how we can come up with a positive and a negative, because these are things that they need to consider. And we just look for our symbols, plug and play, wham bam, thank you, ma'am. That is all. See you guys next time.